Hello, hello. Welcome to Me Time with Mind Escape Vibe, where it is your time to be kind to your mind. I am so excited today because I have the next guest on for Corporate Women Speak. Today I'm sitting down and chopping it up with Dr. Tamika Lott, and I am so excited to have her on today, but I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to toss it over to her so she can introduce herself to the Me Timers. Dr. Tamika, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. So I am Dr. Tamika Lott. I'm a family physician, originally from Waterbury, Connecticut, and currently practicing at a community health center in North Carolina.
All right, all right. Well, thank you for coming on today. I'm super excited because May is that month where we see a lot of folks graduating, a lot of college graduates, even high school graduates, some going into the workplace. And we may have listeners that are in the midst of their careers and feeling like, what do I want to do now? So I'm really hoping Corporate Women Speak gives them more clarity, just to tap into their own personal empowerment as they, make decisions. So, I like to start with sharing a mental victory vibe celebration, and that is just an activity or a moment that you've taken for yourself, or even poured into others that fills your cup. So, Dr. Tamika, what have you done? What is your mental victory vibe celebration?
So this week, what have I done? So I like to do something for myself periodically, and it varies. It could be going to a comedy show, to a concert, to a play. But this past week, I actually went to the zoo. Just went to the zoo. The zoo in North Carolina is a very nice zoo. It is very scenic. Very much feel like you're in nature. So I went there, one, to get some exercise and just to be present with myself and just walk leisurely through. And it was a nice day. So that's what I did this past week.
Oh, that's great. That's great. A love of nature. Is being outside something that you truly enjoy?
Yes.
Me too.
Yes.
It's
yes.
something about that sun, especially early in the morning. The skies is something that I love to look at. And early in the morning, I usually get out and walk about like 6:30, 6:35-ish. And I love to see that cotton candy sky. It's like, I love it. And I love it when I see the oranges too in the sky, the beautiful colors. What is your self-love or personal empowerment theme song? What's that song that keeps you elevated?
I would have to say, Won't He Do It by Corinne Hathorn. That song just keeps my spirits lifted and reminds me, I think a lot of times, especially if I'm going through it, life can be hard. But it reminds me I'm not on this journey alone, and God is always with me. And He brought me through it before; He'll bring me through again. So that song just keeps me elevated.
All right. So I'd like to ask you, what is your process to express gratitude? Especially, I know your schedule is busy. And how do you just take a step back and express gratitude, especially when you have competing priorities?
So for me, right. And I think sometimes just keeping it simple, especially in such a busy life and busy work environment. I express gratitude, I think, the most by giving to others and giving back. So, for instance, in my office, I will often, I think some of the people we take for granted, like your front office staff that are just, that spend their time all day answering phones, or, your medical assistant, or, your ancillary staff that might just be in the back office that you never see, except maybe in the morning and at the end of the day. So oftentimes I'll bring maybe once a week I may stop and get bagels for everyone, or donuts or something, and but for the entire office. And so I'll just send a little email and just let everyone know that there's bagels in the break room, or there's donuts in the break room. And little things like that just make such a big difference. It's nothing big. It didn't take a lot for my time. I just stop in on my way to work, Didn't cost a lot of money, but they're so appreciative. And I've had some come to me and say, Dr. Lott, thank you so much. I didn't have breakfast this morning, or that really I needed a pick me up. So you never know. Just little small things can make a difference. So I think I practice gratitude the most by giving back to others.
I like that. I like that a lot, especially it's random acts of kindness, right? So it's just
Yep.
it fills your cup and it fills their cup too. It can really change the trajectory of someone's day, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I get that. I'm with that. I'm with
Hmm.
that. And I just do random things. Sometimes I'll just send them a card. Sometimes I'll just send them $10 or something and say, hey, go do this, especially with the youngest one who lacks money and funds because, you know, school. Thank you
Right,
so
right.
much.
Hmm.
I'm
Just
going to go
catch
get
them by
gas right
surprise.
now.
Yep. Yep.
So yes, random acts of kindness, random acts of kindness. That's nice. I like that a lot. And how does that process align with in corporate medicine? Like, how does that align?
I think it's very important to incorporate those types of things because it's a very stressful environment a lot of times. I think it can just be very busy. Everyone's, working, and, you don't have much time to kind of just spend together talking to one another, or just, you don't really have much downtime. I mean, I even often find myself working through lunch because of the schedule or patient load, or so it helps. It might be a little brief moment, but it's something where everybody can participate in and feel a part of. So you kind of bring everybody together with this one little random act.
Hmm. Hmm. I like that. I like that a lot. You mentioned working through lunch and patient load. So it could be just those brief moments of walking to room and taking a breath and just saying thank you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about limiting beliefs because I do believe that if we have some limiting beliefs, we can fall into procrastination. It can hold us back from taking that next step. What would be your advice for a new grad that's coming out that is going into a very competitive career space, or someone that's already in a very competitive career space, or even wanting to be walk into entrepreneurship and to just kind of take that next leap? What would be your advice to work through that process?
So I think I've experienced that. And sometimes I think people, including myself, you can get what you say paralyzed by either fear, or anxiety, anticipation, of what is to come. I think sometimes you have to rethink. And I know I will tell myself, okay, and I didn't always do this, but now I realize that, nothing is forever. So say if you try something and it doesn't work out, well, you can try something else, or you can go back. You know, if you have the fear, you want to, just an example of moving somewhere. So you move somewhere and you don't like it, well, you can move somewhere else. And I think sometimes we forget that we have choices, that we have options, that, we can, try again, we can start again. There's always, so you don't always have to get it right the first time. And I think that's what I, tell myself, and try to remind myself of that. Yeah, you don't know unless you try. And then if you try and it doesn't work out, then all right, we try something else. We pivot. We try, and try something different.
I love that. You don't know unless you try.
Right.
I love
Right.
that. I love that. And it's something I think that, especially through a pandemic, and I'm sure that you were extremely busy and highly involved in treating patients during that time. Would you recommend that folks at least try, especially coming out of a pandemic?
Yes, I think the pandemic, yes, it had a significant effect on a lot of people, especially mentally, emotionally. And so I think, we're kind of now at a point where I think it's time. I think some of us have gotten, stagnant or, crippled by whatever that we went through. But it's time to kind of push out of that and just try, um, support yourself too. Don't be hard on yourself. I think sometimes we are just too hard on ourselves, when we don't accomplish all these goals that we set for ourselves. But like you said, small steps, and applaud yourself for the little things that you do get accomplished, so that's how, yeah.
I think that changes the game with the limiting belief, because the limiting belief is, I have this list and I have to get everything done on it. I have to. And if I don't get everything done on it, you look at the list and I only did 2 things on this list. And you beat yourself up around that instead of celebrating the 2 things that you got done.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just changing that mindset. Yep.
And continually doing that. Not just for that one day, but remember to do that each time.
You're right. You are absolutely right.
What advice would you give a young woman newly entering the workplace so that she can set self-expectations, but not develop unhealthy coping mechanisms?
Yeah. So I would tell young women, who are entering the workforce, say to make you your first priority and not your job. And I think sometimes we lose that, and we become like we are our job. And so we get so focused on, performing and doing well for, the job or the employer that we neglect ourselves. And so you don't want to lose yourself. That's most important. And, I would tell them too that you don't overwork yourself to the point of physical and mental exhaustion. Because then you risk, you're going to jeopardize your own health, and then you're not going to be able to perform at the level that you want to perform. So you always got to, think about you first. And so another example I could share personally, and I think sometimes that, we're, at least when I grew up, we didn't take time to stop and process things, when things got overwhelming, or, you face situations that were traumatic. Like, in just an example, in my own life, I at one point suffered loss after loss after loss, like year after year, losing brothers and sisters, and never really taking the time to process that, because I felt like I had to push through. I had to make it. I had to, there was no, there wasn't no, what's the word? I didn't want to feel weak, like it was like this belief that you had to be strong. You could do it. You could get through it. But, we all sometimes have to, acknowledge, whatever we're feeling and going through, you can't.
There's power in vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
There is power in vulnerability. I used to function that same way. I used to function, and I was on an autopilot by this time. But I had to perform, and I had to show up, and I had to just do it a certain way. And even if something occurred that really bothered me, hurt, bothered, affected my thought process, affected how I felt about myself, I would push it down, because it was the thought of, if I take the time to acknowledge and feel these feelings, I am going to be weak.
Yeah.
And it was hard actually reframing that mentality. And every now and again, she tried to creep back in, and I have to give her a different job.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you're saying that, because that is the first thought you start this position, you entering the workforce, you're graduating, you're excited, but don't forsake yourself. Take the
Right.
time to sit down and write down those self expectations. When you
Right.
were coming and going through and just growing in your career, did you have a moment where you sat down and just said, let me just write down some self expectations for myself so that I can be clear on how I want to move and shape? Did you do that?
So it took me a long time. So I did not do that. I wish I had. I wish I had those tools, to know to do that. But I did it much later, and I did it when I transitioned. This was when I transitioned from, you know, um, working under contract, in this hospital system, and then transitioning to become an independent contractor. It was then that I looked at, okay, what, you know, what works for me. Like that's when I did that. And that's when I realized that, okay, this isn't working for me. So what do I need? What do I need to be successful? What do I need to be at peace and happy and joyful and love, what I'm doing? Because sometimes, it doesn't come together. So you could be very, if that makes sense. So your job could be pulling you away from your true self. And and I found that didn't work for me. I needed a job, I needed to be able to work, and I need that to align with my values and what I wanted to achieve in my personal life, and professional life. So yeah, I did it much later, but I think it would be beneficial to young women, who are starting out to do that ahead of time. And so when something doesn't feel right, you don't spend all these years, suffering or regretting and wishing that you had, you could kind of say, okay, this isn't working for me. Let me try it, something different. And the other piece I would give the young women is don't be afraid to, advocate for yourself. I think we're not even taught to, negotiate, women in general. Men seem to do better at that. But as women, I think we have this fear, we kind of just take what's presented to us and work with that instead of saying, no, that's not going to work for me. This is what I would like, and we put our needs and our wants and desires aside.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I've done that a lot. The art of negotiation was always something that it was a daunting thought for me. Well, what am I going to say? What if they don't want to give me the job because I want this? Because that's not, you're right. That's not something that we're taught. Okay. No. Even as kids, growing up for me, I don't want to date myself. I grew up in the 80s and the 70s, and you couldn't go and negotiate with mom about anything. It was, hey, this is how it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's it. And that carried on into my professional life. And then I had a mentor, and she said, well, why aren't you advocating for yourself? You are worth more than that. Don't you know your worth? It's okay to know your worth. And I remember looking at her like, what do you mean? What am I supposed to do now? Because I was so afraid to do it.
Right.
It's okay. It is okay to have a voice and to advocate for yourself. I love that. Yes.
Right.
And doing so also means setting boundaries. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yes. And that's not easy either, but that's important. It's very important. So I'm still learning to do that, and I'm still setting boundaries.
Yes, it is for some it's truly a daunting thought. And I always start with, well, what are your deal breakers? So when you started to really set boundaries and say, okay, look, this is getting to be a bit much. I need to show up for me. What was your process? How did you start that? How did you ground yourself to say, it's really not that bad. I'm going to set this boundary. I am going to start to think about what I need, what they can do to help me. How did you start? How did you ground yourself to do that?
Oh, that's a good question. How did I start? Um, you know, at some point, and I think from all the stress and pressure, I sort of feel like I got to a breaking point that I knew that if I didn't make a change, that I wasn't going to be any good for myself. Like my physical health and my mental health, um, you know, were being affected. And don't get me wrong, there was a time when I would push through that too, you know.
Mm.
So I've experienced, clinical depression and anxiety, and now I was able to put on a good face so people didn't know what I was dealing with and what I was struggling with, because I was, able to. But that's not a place, that's not a healthy place for anyone to be, and you don't want to, you know put yourself or push yourself to that point. But after a while I realized what triggered me and what kinds of things would set me back, or trigger depression or anxiety, whether it was being overworked or taking on more than I really could you know handle. And I think that's what made me, I think, experiencing um, those symptoms, forced me to say, okay, I don't want to live like this. So what can I do, to make sure that I don't get back in that place? I don't want to be in this dark place. So I would now make decisions that I knew would, that would keep me from getting into that dark place again.
What if someone doesn't recognize that they're going toward that dark place? They're in that dark place. Could you talk about some of the things that they may feel or experience, so they can start to really recognize and say, oh, wait a minute, I need to make an adjustment?
Absolutely. I think that's important. I think it's not talked about enough. And, unfortunately, there is this still stigma, around mental health and mental illness. And I don't look at, I don't, and what I want, and this was something I just listened to recently, and it made so much sense. And I think sometimes that we look at people as being abnormal if they have, some type of mental illness, whether it's depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, whatever it may be. But most of the time, it's not. It's not that the person is abnormal, it's that they're experiencing an abnormal response to their situation or circumstance. And so it's the circumstances that is abnormal. So whether it's, a toxic work environment that has, that's what's abnormal. You're not abnormal. And so I want to make sure that, that women understand that. And so but to get back to your original question, some of the signs or symptoms could be, you start to pull away from others, you start to isolate. It could be that you start to just have, negative thoughts and negative thinking that has become more consistent. You feel sad, you feel down. That's the obvious, feeling down, sad, sometimes just losing motivation. There are things like you like to do. You used to like to, go out and, whatever, go out, shop, play sports, play tennis, whatever you used to do, and now you don't want to do those things. It could be that you haven't struggled, like in the mornings, you don't want to get out of bed. It takes all the energy you have just to get yourself up out of bed. That could be a sign. It could be a change in your eating habits. You could be eating a lot more, or you could be barely eating. So all these little, all of these things could be signs. So you just have to, when you start to notice these changes, don't ignore them. That's what I would say. Don't ignore them. Whether it's seeking, counsel, from a friend or loved one or therapist, to talk it out. But yeah, sometimes it's subtle, but sometimes, sometimes it could be as deep as having suicidal thoughts, feeling like, life is not worth living. You don't want to be here. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go out and buy a gun and shoot yourself, but just even ruminating about the fact that, life is just too hard. What's my purpose? All those things, if you start to, go down those paths, that could be a sign that you're, you know, going into, or experiencing depression. Yeah.
So, Dr. Tamika, let's talk a little bit about that because I know in our community, especially in the brown community, African Americans, Black Americans, in our community, there is no true conversation about mental health. Coming up, I can say that was never a conversation. It was truly, as you stated, you are abnormal. The person was abnormal. What would you recommend for families or even for these young ladies to start having these conversations within their family units or with their support system or whatever village that they have? Because even if they have a support system or a village, there's a probability that we don't talk about that. We're not talking about, we're not going to go there. How would you recommend they begin the conversation?
Right. And so sometimes, and I agree. And, I thought about this like with my own family. You want to feel safe. You want to feel that you could express your feelings, and have your feelings heard and validated. You don't want, and so sometimes your family is not the best place or, people to express that with, especially if you know that you're going to be, just shot down, or you shouldn't feel that way, or what's wrong with you, you just need to do this. That's not what you need to hear. So it may be a peer, it may be a teacher, it may be, it's just someone that you feel like you can trust, and that, that would provide a safe place for you to share. Because I know that I think at one point I tried to just even open a conversation. This happened to me. I tried to open a conversation within my own family. I think at the time, one of my aunts was present, my mom and my uncle. And my question was really regarding all of the substance abuse and alcohol and addictions that I saw within my family. And my question was like, why? What's the root cause? Like, what happened in our family to cause, so many of my loved ones to be, addicted to drugs and alcohol? And they became very defensive. And I realized right away, this is not going to be a safe place to discuss this. They didn't want to acknowledge the problem. They really didn't want to acknowledge it as a problem. And unfortunately, that's what happens. And I think even for my siblings, I think a lot of it was self-medication, because they were struggling and didn't have any place or anyone to express that to. So if you're in a family that does communicate and has that open communicate, by all means, have these conversations. But if you're not, don't be afraid to go outside to someone, to talk to, because you'll be surprised that there's so many people that experience the same thing that you're going through, and just was waiting for the opportunity to also, open up and talk. So, but yeah,
I think that in our generation, and I'm just making an assumption that we're kind of close in generationally. It was always that saying of what happens in our house stays in our house. What goes on in our family stays in our family.
Yeah.
And
yes.
that was taught and stated quite often, right? And
Yes.
it really built up that barrier to have those conversations.
Right.
It really
Right.
built up that barrier. And it also didn't make us better adults either, because we went through life carrying the trauma.
Yes.
And I like that you're saying it's okay to have those conversations with someone else. It's okay to ask for help. And it's not necessarily saying that your family is a bad family. It's just saying, I need help.
Right. Exactly. And it took me a while to understand that I think about my parents and, my older sibling, like they didn't have those tools. They didn't have the resources, so they didn't know. They taught what they knew, and so at some point, you you want to break those cycles, those generational cycles, and I think it starts with the younger generation, and that's how, and to keep those conversations going. But yeah, I had to kind of accept that, okay, this is what, their limitations are. It's not that they, this is what they were taught. This is what they, knew.
It was a deal breaker for them. And the way to show mutual respect was to say, hey, this is just not the time or place. I cannot approach this conversation.
Right.
Yeah, I can identify with that. And in turn, well, I internalized a lot. I always wanted to just kind of show up in the idea of, I'm going to do it right from the very beginning because I don't want to disappoint. And I think that that's a very common thought process, especially when you're first generation graduate, right?
Yes.
Or you walk into this career that your family is just so elated and happy. Oh my God, I can't believe you're doing it. Mm-hmm. But you still need support, and it's still okay to ask for help.
Right.
And how would you recommend someone start to do that? I mean, what if they're afraid? What if they're afraid to just say anything to a best friend, to an auntie, to an uncle, or to a close family friend, or anything like that? How would you recommend they start? I mean, you can find anything nowadays on the internet. I mean, Google University is a thing.
Right. So you're
right. It doesn't always mean it's the right thing.
Mm-hmm. But I would say you're right. There are a lot of resources, but I would, even, within jobs, they have programs, the EAP, the program. So, and this is confidential. This is not going to be shared with your, employer, or if you're, on a college campus, utilize the student, the student health center that has therapists and, or seek out, your own counseling or therapist, and I think sometimes that's we weren't taught that, and so I've taken advantage of that, and it has been like such an eye-opening experience. I mean, it's helped me so much, having a therapist, because you have someone that can see things through a different lens, and help you see things from a different perspective. And it really it makes a difference. But I agree with you. I think I internalized a whole lot. And I would, tell, any young woman now, don't carry all that in you and with you, because you're carrying it. You're just holding on to all this trauma, but get it out, so if you have someone, even if you can't get it out in person, get it out on paper, write it out, just get it out of your system, don't carry it like I did for so long.
I carried it too.
And then especially, so I don't know if there's anyone listening that comes from a family, where there was a lot of addiction and, substance abuse or alcohol addiction. But another program that I took advantage of, and it's free, I say it's free therapy, it's called Al-Anon. So you probably, they may have heard of AA and NA, which are for, alcoholics, or, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, there's a program called Al-Anon, which is for families or people who have loved ones who struggle with these addictions. So it's really for you to get help. It's a 12-step program, but it's for you, because you realize, over time that, you are affected in so many ways by, your loved one's addictions that you don't even realize. And so it helps kind of get back, putting the priority on you and taking care of you, So that program has been a tremendous help to me. And so for people who don't want to do in person now, after the pandemic, they got virtual programs, but it's all free. And so it's a place where you can just listen or you can share, and it's non-judgmental, it's confidential. And it's other people who have experienced or going through the same things that, you have experienced. So a lot of people don't know about that. And the reason I bring that up is because, especially for women of color, because I've been in these, to these meetings, and it's often not, it's predominantly Caucasian people. It's not us. And we suffer so much from these diseases, but we don't take advantage of these resources. So
we suffer in silence. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Why do we choose to suffer in silence? Because sometimes it may not be a choice. Maybe I used the wrong word. Maybe I shouldn't say why do we choose to. Maybe it's just you don't know that those resources exist, or being afraid of how the family might feel. What is your take on that? The suffering in silence. Do you think it's rooted in how we came to, slavery and the history? What do you think?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what the cause is, but I will say, and I don't know why within our community, that we don't have these discussions, that we don't place an emphasis on mental and emotional well-being. That is so much needed. I don't know if it's because, we had this survival mentality, whether it's because of slavery, and we just did what we had to do to survive and never took the time to process. It was just, work, do, go, I'm not sure why, I'm not sure. What are your thoughts as to why we
work, do, go? I like how you put that. I think that that our coping mechanism as a people was work, do, go, just as you put it. Because if you're working and you're busy in your mind. Mm-hmm. And if your mind is busy, then it's not lingering on that thought of oppression. It's not lingering on the thought of what you don't have. It is when you are alone with your thoughts, right? That you really run into what you are running from. And then you run to something else to run from those thoughts.
Right.
I often say to my grandson and to my grown children when I say, well, why is that? And they say, well, I don't know. I say, well, you're using I don't know as a way to not even process how you're feeling and processing that thought. You're pushing it down and putting I don't know on the top of it. And at some point, it's going to all boil over. So let's just take it one layer at a time. You don't have to have a deep conversation about why you're feeling this way, but acknowledge how you feel right now. Mm-hmm. And that's an approach that I've taken, especially with my grown children, because, at home, like the world will beat them up in high school, middle school, grade school. But then they come home and it's like, oh, I'm back home. Everything's okay. But then you become a grown up and you're out on your own. And the world is throwing tomatoes at you all the time.
Right.
And feel how you feel. And feel how you feel doesn't mean go out and say nasty things to people or do bad things to people. It doesn't mean that. No. It just means this is how it made me feel.
Right.
Yeah, acknowledge it. And just sometimes simply acknowledging how you feel starts with making you feel a whole lot better. And then you choose a better coping mechanism.
True.
And that I had to learn that because my daughter struggled with substance abuse. I was so angry at her. Instead of meeting her where she was, to bring her to a level of understanding how to process her feelings so she doesn't reach for the substance. And we still work through that. She's clean now. She's been clean for almost 2.5 years, going on 3 years. But we still have these conversations. And when she has something going on with her, I don't push it away. I don't say, I can't talk right now. I'm too busy. I say, honey, I'm sorry you're going through this. But how are you feeling right now? And if she says, I don't know, it's just really bad and I know I'm busy, I'll say, please tap into our village. I do. I say, tap into our village, because you need to process these feelings right away, because I don't want you to use an unhealthy coping mechanism.
Right. Right.
You know? And then I send out a red alert to the village. Hey, this is what's going on. Check on code, check on code, because this is what's going on. You know, because I made that mistake, but that's how I was taught as well. And I had to realize that I wasn't taught that because, you know, they didn't care about me. It was generational. Right. That's how they were taught. So this is what they did.
Exactly.
You know, my mother would go hard for us. Now my mother will show up, and when she's showing up to go hard, everybody better duck down. But, you know, and she taught me that too. You know, so there is a lot that goes on with that, but I do believe that we need to have more conversations about it. And Lord, let me live. I want to create a platform where that's a conversation that is common in our community.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know? So, what advice would you give your younger self to help cultivate self-trust?
I think that would go back to what we just recently discussed, as far as finding a person or people that you feel comfortable with, that you trust, to be able to, you know, openly express your feelings, your desires. Someone who's going to validate your feelings, not, you know, and not shut you down. I think I didn't do that. I think I bottled everything up. I internalized. I didn't express. And so if I was to go back, I would, you know, be more open about, and like I said, it may not be with the family, because that may not be the safest place to express. But someone who you do trust, you know, and I think sometimes, and not worry so much about, you know, whether they're going to think of me, you know, because now it's about you. It's about you being your best healthy self, you know.
So you're saying that we should start having accountability advocates younger.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes. Absolutely.
Ladies, did you hear that? Did you hear accountability? And it may not be your best friend. Your best friend will side with you. You need someone that's going to say,
right.
You don't. Everybody on your team shouldn't be your yes people. I'm just saying.
That's true. That's very true. That's very true.
Dr. Tamika, I'm so glad you were on today. I think that you gave me 3 great ideas for what I want to do for fall shows. I want to put a panel together for that. You gave me some ideas today. I'm going to write all my ideas down because it makes me super excited. But, you know, it makes me excited to just have this podcast and to have a platform on the podcast where women can come on and help other women. And I thank you so much for doing that for us today. Great information today. Great vibe. Great conversation. I hope you enjoyed the conversation between myself and Dr. Tamika. And just remember, this is me time with Mind Escape Vibe. Where it is your time to be kind to your mind. Have a good day.